you for taking the class. What are y'all's thoughts about the class so far? Anything I could do different? Anything I could do better? Well, I'm trying. Like I said, especially when it comes to some of this philosophy stuff, I'm treading water. You know what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to stay alive. So that's all I can say. All right. 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 And you're probably right in that respect. A lot of this is boiled down to do what you want, and that's the philosophy they live by. And that's what we're dealing with nowadays, right? And the thing is, that's the reason why whenever it starts coming into all these other issues, then do whatever you want. When we start talking about abortion and all this other stuff, they will find ways to justify what they're doing. And we need to be aware of this. We need to understand where they're coming from, try as much as we possibly can to show the falsity of their views in love, right? Speak the truth in love. We show the falsity of their views with the ideal of hopefully getting them to see the truth. That's so before we go any further, let's pray. Kerry, would you lead us, please, brother?
Father, this evening that you've given us all a safe passage here. Last tonight, thank you for the word, wisdom, that is harsh to us, that we in your service. All the many things you give us. Help us have a good lesson tonight. Come here and enjoy learning what we Jesus' name.
Amen. Tonight we start really full force on the chapter dealing with abortion. That's chapter 9, page 131. So we'll get into that. I know that most of you have already read through this, and I hope that as you go through here, you're getting what he says, and also trying to see my reinforcements as an effort to try to, again, talk about these particular issues. I think we went through some of these things that I think I brought them out last week. The thing I really tried to emphasize last week in the last part of the class was that it is God who gives us life. And so if God gives us life, we do not have the right to take that life. We don't have the right to take that life under its parameter, unless it's by the parameters that God has set down in Scripture. So the bottom line is we understand that. We looked at the three different positions on abortion that people have. Number one, there's the idea that a babe in the womb is fully human. And if that's the case, then we have to understand that if we do believe it's fully human, that God created that baby, then we should not take its life. That would be murder. And again, when we start thinking about the idea, a lot of times murder, many times, will be defined as taking of innocent life. You cannot find a life more innocent than that of a baby in a womb. Why? It's not sinned. It's not done anything that would cause anybody to kill it. Okay, so we need to understand that. And the basis of that is sanctity of life. And the mother's rights when it comes to this issue boils down to the baby's life precedes her right to privacy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that idea of privacy, especially with regards to the Constitution and the Amendment 14 to the Constitution here in a few minutes, okay? But I want to bring that idea out. If you have the idea that the baby is a potential human, then we can sit down and argue that now potential human means that he's not fully human. She is not fully there. And one of the things that I hope you've noticed as you're going through this chapter is a lot of people that try to do this, they play around with words a good bit. And this is something that I really want to keep in our minds, because sometimes we're sitting there thinking, and we have to define the terms. Otherwise, we may think they may be agreeing with us when they're really not. For example, one of the things he does bring out in this particular chapter is that sometimes they will talk about a baby being human, but not a person. Now, what is that? That's a conflation of terms. That's what it boils down to, is saying, all right, it may be a human being, as we would define a human being, but it is not a person. So, if the baby is not a person, we have the right to take its life, even though it may still be a human. Well, that's the way they play the games. And again, this is what, and I hate to say it again, but that's kind of the way they look at the whole situation, because the defining of words is so vitally important in any argument that you have, in any argument you make with anybody. So I could stand up, for example, on a Sunday morning, and I could preach on a sermon on grace. Now, immediately, because we know some of the problems that have been associated with the doctrine of grace, there are those that believe in grace only, that we are saved by grace only. There are those that believe that we don't have to do anything. That's the universalist view. God is going to save us all by his grace, right? If that's the case, then we might throw away the rest of the Bible because, we got all these other issues. So a lot of times we have to spend our time defining these terms so that they can't play this game with us and try to make us think that we're on the same page they are, or that we do it. And that's where they get so upset about a lot of times about Christianity, is because we do demand logical definition of terms to where everybody can understand these. So this is something that we have to do and understand and come along that line. So when we talk about the ideal of a human being potential human, it's either a human or it's not. It's not a situation where, whenever, when a cow is conceived, the calf is conceived, it is a cow. That's just all that. We will not sit down all day long and talk about whether it's a cow or not. It is a cow. It may not be a total cow. Whenever the cow is born, we call it a calf. But I tell you what, it tastes the same. The meat tastes the same, right? The only thing different is a lot more tender, and we appreciate that a little bit, the veal cutlets or something along that line, but it's still a cow. And we all understand cow, calf, veal, beef, all of those words are tied in with a bovine. Oh, there's another word. You see what I'm saying? And I guarantee you that those calves, those calves, when they are born, they are going to be looked at as full-blown calves. But at what point does it become a calf? At what point does it become a cow from a calf? So we get into all of these discussions, and again, a calf is a cow, a baby cow. All right? It's a cow maybe that's not but under 1 year of age. So we understand we make those distinctions, but whenever it comes to the rest or to the animal world, we don't really play these games because everybody understands what we're talking about. But they have to come up with this, and I believe that part of the reason why they have to come up with these explanations is because they have to admit to the fact that humans are superior to every other animal on the face of the earth. So what gives us the superiority? Well, if you listen to the evolutionary hypothesis, it's what? We just was able to get from the point of becoming a one cell amoeba to all the way up to the point to where we are right now. So now let's talk about humanity. Let's talk about humans. Let's talk about whether a person is a subhuman. Subhuman? How do you define that? What do you call a subhuman? Well, someone that's not fully human. Okay, then is it a potential human? Is it, or he or she is it a baby human? What exactly are we talking about here? And you see, now that we start talking about people, then the whole argument takes on a whole different shift, right?
Well,
Mm-hmm.
Directly you're saying it's something else has potential,
Mm-hmm.
has potential, it is before it has potential.
Right. That's what it was before it reaches that full potential. That's
So
exactly
what
right.
is that?
It's a human, still a human. Now we understand that. We understand that, but again, that's what they're doing. And then there's again the idea that a baby is nothing but subhuman. Okay, so that's the point that he's trying to make here. Now, the belief that the fetus is subhuman on page 132 of the book, if you're reading this, abortion on demand was recognized by the United States Supreme Court in two major decisions, Doe versus Bolton and Roe versus Wade in 1973. Okay? The court argued that women's right to privacy prevails over the state's interest in regulating abortion. All right, now where did they get the idea of the women's right to privacy? All right, there was a guy on the Supreme Court, Thurgood Marshall. Okay? He made this argument from the ideal of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution states this: This is something that we need to understand. This was ratified July the 9th, 1868. Now, what had just happened in America in 1868? The Civil War. And what was the argument that a lot of people were making about slaves at that time? Huh?
They were only 2/3 a person.
They were subhuman. So therefore they could what? Do whatever they want to with it, kill them, whatever else, because they were, and again, read some of the writings at that particular time, they would argue that. By the way, and I want you to challenge you to think about this, we still have slavery today. Atlanta is one of the biggest sex slaves cities right now in the United States, because again, it's so close to the coast. All righty. And the reality is again, when you think about how people are treating these people, they treat them as subhumans, they have to be able to what? Do some of the things that they allow to have happen to these people. That should never be the case. How many of us remember not too long ago, I think it was in Texas, where they found a tractor trailer truck full of about 35 people killed, and they were all sex slaves. They had been left in a trailer because the guys that were supposed to take them to wherever saw the police coming. He just left them there in the trailer, took off. And it got to be 100 and something degrees outside. Inside the trailer, it was about 150, and it killed 35. And we're talking about I'm talking about in the last couple of years in Texas. So the reality is, we feel like we could do that because they're subhuman. Now, as I said earlier, Thurgood Marshall made this point on the Amendment 14 of the Constitution. And this was made right after the Civil War. And here's this first section. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall the state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. Now, first off, I want you to notice something. Now, there's also about three more sections here, but it mainly talks about the representatives, and it talks about senators and representatives and the public debt, whether or not they should be able to be paid and what kind of money. But it boils down to that first part. Did you ever hear the word privacy in that, what I just read? No. So Thurgood Marshall took this particular amendment and said, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges. He said that privilege implies the ideal of privacy. So this is where the argument, especially from the Supreme Court's viewpoint, this is where the argument comes from about the fact that a mother's right to privacy is more important than the baby's right to life. Why? Because it is her privilege. And no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So he took the idea, they have to first argue that this fetus is non-human, subhuman, or potential human, and that the women have the privileges, and that includes the privilege of privacy. And her right to privacy trumps any right that the child has in the womb. And that's where their argument was made. What's also interesting about this is the idea, if we say that the child is a human being, then this automatically takes away what? It takes away, if we say that the child is a human being in the womb, that child has the right and the privilege of life. So you see, they had to come up with some way or another to justify it. Thurgood Marshall presented this particular argument, and again, he made this concerning the thing concerned right after the Civil War, because what was this amendment designed to do? It was designed to help everybody to understand that the slaves had as many rights, freed slaves had as many rights, privileges. If they were born in the United States, freed slaves had the right and the privileges of any other citizen of the United States. But you see how sometimes these laws are forced to make them say things that they never was intended to make in the first place. So that's the idea there. The Ryman's right to privacy prevails over the state's interest in regulating abortions. All righty? In 1989, the Webster decision gave states more regulatory rights but did not outlaw abortion. Why? Because again, they thought that the women still had the right to privacy. The Gonzales partial birth abortion prohibition in 2000 only forbids abortion for babies partly, but not completely out of the womb. Now, what has happened as a result of that? You have states all across this union, a whole range of states, making laws now in each state as to what can and can't happen with regards to abortion. For example, Brian Kemp signed a law here in the state of Georgia that the moment we hear a baby's heartbeat, then that baby should not be aborted. Now that's going before the Supreme Court. All right? Utah and some of these other places have the same laws. All righty? When you go up north, so some of those places up north, they actually may have made laws that, and some of the governors and so forth have signed laws saying that you can abort a baby up to the moment of birth. I mean, in other words, as the baby is coming out of the birth canal, you can abort that baby at that moment in time. So now we got a whole bunch of states coming up with all kinds of different, anywhere from you can hear a heartbeat, which according to some happens within the first 6 or 8 days of conception. You could possibly hear a heartbeat at that stage of the game. I may be wrong there. I may have to, I'm trying to do some more research on that. I think it was either 6 days or some of them make the argument, well, when it was conceived, we remember it travels down it was in the fallopian tube and it travels down to the uterus before it implants on the uterus. And that at that point in time, it's not a human, it's just a blastocyst. It's just what we call a cyst of some sort. Well, isn't it interesting that we always call these things and name these things that's not there? But the baby wants an implant. So they say anytime up to that point in time. But the problem is, what happens? Most women don't even know they're pregnant at that time. The only thing that really can begin to emphasize that was the difference of the hormones and the tests that prove that. So they say, well, we could kill the baby, or we can kill this cyst by, a D&C or something like that, if she knew at that moment in time that she was pregnant. Well, by the time she really does find out, and by the time all these other things start happening, that baby is well formed. You can tell it's a baby. You can start hearing its heartbeat. And then we've all seen the pictures in the various places. You've seen the pictures of where babies are sucking their thumb, kicking. They respond to their mother's voice. On and on and on it goes. So the question always comes back to my mind as we start looking at this. All right? You call it a potential human, and yet that human, even in the womb, is doing things which humans do. Sucking its thumb, listening to noise, all things like that. It experiences. The baby will experience pain. There are some abortionists and others that have absolutely said, at that point in time, I think the doctor that's in charge of the Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson, I think, who it is, who had performed operations on babies in the womb. He would say that the pain that a baby experiences whenever it's being aborted is excruciating. So at what point, that's the question, at what point does it go from cyst to human to person? We would not want to kill a person. We do not want to kill a human. So we have to come up with other names to try to justify what we're trying to do. Sometimes they even make the argument that there are Bible verses that bring that idea out. If you're looking again at page 132, he says, abortion is opposed by general and special revelation. All right, general revelation or special revelation, the Bible says God, the first human became a living being only after God gave him life. Since breathing, now here's their point. if the baby cannot breathe, therefore it's not human until it is born and takes its first breath. And the reason is because God breathed into his nostrils the what? The breath of life. Therefore, their argument is from the Bible. Okay, they will come up with passages from the Bible to try to justify it. But the baby does not become a human until it takes its first breath. What's the problem with that? Well, the baby could not live if it wasn't breathing. Mothers, and again, we know the oxygen is transferring from the mother's lung into the baby and the placenta to where it can live, right? So obviously there is intake of oxygen for the baby to prosper and to be able to get to the point where he does that, or she does that. Secondly, Job 34, and by the way, what happens, let's think about this for just a moment. If it takes the breath for that to happen, the baby's got to have oxygen to live, even in the mother's womb, right? So if oxygen is not present in the mother's womb, it's also saying that oxygen may not be present in her body, and what does that suggest? She's about to die, right? So there's something to be said about that. Job 13, or 34, 14, 15 said, if God withdrew his spirit and breath, all humankind would perish. So again, they connect life with breath. All right? Isaiah 57, 16. The breath of human I, God, have created. They make the beginning of breath to be the point of the human being's creation. Now, notice what he says there. They make the taking of the first breath the beginning of the what? The beginning of the human being's creation. In Ecclesiastes 6, a stillborn child comes into the world without meaning. It departs in darkness. It never saw the sun or knew anything. In other words, the unborn are no more than the dead, who also know nothing but lie in the darkness of the grave. So you see, they'll use this passage to say, well, just like it's black and dark in the mother's womb, so an unborn baby is not alive. It's already in the mother's womb. It's as it was. And so there it's what? It's in the darkness of the grave. And then they even take the statement made to Judas. It would have been better for you if you had not been born. Okay? And say, in essence, what? Human life begins at birth. Well, of course, Jesus didn't argue that. He's not making an argument for abortion there. He's saying to Judas, it would have been better if you had never been born and doing what you're about to do. So that's something to think about. Yes, sir.
Yeah, doesn't the baby have, I looked at the baby, and the baby has a neighbor cord.
Right. Right.
So whenever the baby,
right.
that the baby has some way to breathe.
Right. That's right.
The neighbor cord, that's the connection to the mother.
Right.
Every baby has a cord.
That's exactly right. And again, we can make the arguments, rightly so, that there have been babies born at 24 weeks that have been able to live. So all these things come into play there. Some people make the argument that babies are subhuman because a baby is not a human, and I'm on page 133, until it possesses a self-conscience. Okay? So the question is, when is it? Well, they'll make the argument that they don't experience a self-consciousness until even after they're out of the womb. Well, I'm sorry. I think they are conscious. I think they're aware that they are in this world at that point in time, aren't they? But according to them, they don't really, and depending on, and this was something, again, if you went ahead and read the next chapter where it talks about infanticide, they would say that a baby is not, or a child is not really self-conscious until when? A year old. Well, I got a problem with that. Watch a baby playing. A baby before he's even a year old, he'll play with his toes. She'll play with her, she'll suck her thumb. She knows. She understands. And again, she's just getting a lot of things along that line. So according to them, we know that that baby is not self-conscious. We know that baby's here. Baby will respond to its mother's voice. A baby will also respond to some of the others that they heard in the womb. That's why you think about it in this respect. The baby is learning from the time of conception, and it's learning and hearing so much, even while it's in its mother's womb. So The argument from physical dependence. Another reason given sometimes by proponents of abortion is the baby is an extension of the mother's body. And since the baby is intruding on the mother's physical domain, she has the right to abort it because she has the right to control her own body. And again, this is where the idea, this shouldn't happen. We think about it in this respect, but a lot of times, and here's where, again, people trying to justify this, they say, well, you know, if the mother did not choose to have the baby, all right, well, in a lot of situations when babies are born, mothers and fathers make the choice to do that, right? The only situation might be a case of rape. And that's going to ask the question, and we're going to talk about that in just a few moments, but is it right to abort a baby that's been conceived in rape? She did not want this to happen to her. It did happen to her. So what exactly needs to happen in that respect? The argument of transmission from the hormonal signals. Many pro-choice advocates argue that the unborn are not human beings until implantation, and that's when it's what? It's going down the fallopian tube and actually implanted into the uterus. So it's, you know, the unborn may have a complete genetic structure, but it lacks interface with the humans. All right, what happens if the baby does not implant in the uterus? It dies. It does not have access to the nutrients it needs. It just dies, and that's it. All right? And again, you think about this, at the time of about a week, a lot of times these women still do not know they're pregnant. All this is going on in their bodies at this particular time, and they don't even realize it. All right? The argument from the zygote's reliance on material molecules for its development. They argue since the zygote's genes are activated by the mother, it does not have any independent existence of its own. So the idea is it has to have messenger ribonucleic acid from the mother's ovum that sets the cell through the development of the 4-cell to the 8-cell change. In other words, for that baby to start growing, it has to have a hormone from the mother to tell it to do that. So it's relying upon the mother. And so at that point in time, it's not what? It's subhuman. It's not human yet. But again, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, it does become a human, right? Or let me say this. It is a human at the moment of conception. It has, how many chromosomes do we have in our cells? 46. 23 from the mother, 23 from the father. All right, that's what makes our DNA. That's what sets up everything else. All right? They make the argument that abortion should be legal because of the safety of the mother. And they say that illegal abortion is dangerous. And they argue anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 maternal deaths from illegal abortions are offered as evidence. Well, number one, let's think about this for just a moment. How do they know there's 5,000 to 10,000 illegal abortions? Most of the time, if it's illegal, mama's not going to say nothing to nobody, right? Nobody's going to say nothing because it is illegal, right? So they're making a guess as to how many illegal abortions there were. And they even go so far as to say, okay, there was a lot of abortions going on before they were outlawed, all right? Or actually, after they were outlawed, they were just illegal abortions. So 5,000 to 10,000 women were killed because of these illegal abortions. But there probably were a lot more abortions than that we don't know nothing about. The reality is where did they get these numbers? Are they just plucking them out of thin air? Are they actually going around and asking the whole feminine race, have you ever been pregnant? Did you ever get an illegal abortion? Did we conduct a survey amongst all the women in the United States and ask them that? Did we do it before Roe versus Wade? Because that's when you have to realize it, because when we call it illegal, that means what? The states would not allow it to happen. So the bottom line is, what's also interesting about this is you're looking at this, they're trying to justify it, but they will not tell you as well. And they will have these numbers about how many women have died in abortion clinics.
So you can have all of these so-called statements of illegal abortions with no record of any trials.
Why? Because they were illegal. And again,
Well, how do you know that even took place?
that's exactly right. You just have to go on the essence of what a woman said.
So if you said it was illegal,
Hmm.
um,
And you were living in a state where it was illegal, then if you just in essence confessed to doing something illegal, so there you go.
then you have to have a person to prosecute.
That's exactly right.
So where is that information?
That's exactly right. There's the point I'm trying to make. All right. And then the idea of the autonomous rights of the mother's body. They argue that a mother has her rights to privacy and autonomy. It means if a woman does not want her bodily organs to sustain the life of the unborn, she has the right to abort the child. Okay? Therefore, if the woman feels that her rights are imposed upon, she has the option of aborting the child. And they make this argument. A person has the right to evacuate an intruder from taking residence in one's home and attaching himself to one's refrigerator for 9 months. They're saying just as we have the right to defend our home, so a woman has the right to defend her body. If she doesn't want the intruder, just like we don't want the intruder, then if we have the right to kill somebody that comes into our house, even though we didn't invite them, and you see, there's the key, the invitation. Sometimes, a lot of the abortions that are carrying on right now, there was invitations for this to happen. You see what I'm saying? It's very rare that it's just rape. All right, the numbers, when we compare the actual numbers of people that were women that aborted babies and look at the numbers that aborted babies that were raped, the numbers are going to be substantially different, right? It's become, and you know what I'm saying, I don't mean anything about it, it's become a method of birth control, right? And then the argument from abuse and neglect. Well, we need to have abortion so that mothers won't have these babies, so these babies won't be abused and neglected. Number one, we do have a problem with child abuse. Number two, we have a problem with child neglect. But having an abortion is perhaps the worst abuse you could ever possibly have. You're killing a fetus, you're killing a human from that. They make the argument what? Well, we need to be able to deal with those that have deformities. A lot of discussions right now are about the babies with Down syndrome. Those babies needed to be aborted so that they won't be a what? A drag on society. They won't pull down all the money that society has, okay? So the ideal is, you know, should society be forced to care for deformed children? All right? Now, abortionists argue, and I want you to underline this if you're looking at it in your book, that the concern for the genetic purity of the human race should lead us to weed out bad genes from the human gene pool from which all future human beings will come. What is that? What is that theory? That theory is simply the theory of evolution. We're getting rid of the bad genes so that future humans won't have those bad genes. They will not have those things. And therefore, and really when you're talking about it, it boils down to, and I submit unto you this, even though a lot of the people that are for abortion claim to be Christians, the bottom line is the philosophy that backs up the whole abortion argument really boils down to evolution. If we believe in evolution, if we believe we got here by what? By chance. If we do not believe that there's a creator, then it is our duty to make sure that we pass on the very best genes that there are so that we might have this race of superhumans. You see, we're talking now about what? Potential humans, subhumans. Now we're looking at a time when we might have superhumans. Oh, wait a minute. We've got them. Superman, Batman, Robin, you know, the X-Men, all those others that, and isn't it interesting? I just challenge you to think about this for a few moments, but as I was reading through this, I was thinking a lot about what the media was putting out. How the media has tried to put out the idea that there are supermen, that there are, and why? Maybe in the hopes of thinking that eventually we will get to that point where we're all supermen, superwomen, or whatever one with those wonderful powers that you see on the screen, right? So it's something to think about. Think about so many of our movies today. They all have this basis in evolutionary ideas. Some of my favorite movies, okay, I'll be honest with you, some of my favorite movies are the movies, the Star Wars movies. I did not go see them in the theater, but I did see them later on, especially 4, 5, and 6. You remember how that thing starts off? Once a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. A long time ago. So what does that suggest? Well, think about this for just a minute. A long time ago, that means if that's the case, then if we are the descendants of that super race where they're having all these starfighters and everything like that, what's happened to us? Okay? Well, man, something bad's happened. Something bad's happened because we're not there in that whole scenario nowadays where we're jumping from one planet to the other and having star battles up in the universe, are we? So do you really want to make that up? Do you really want to make that implication then? Okay? We've gone downhill, not up. Right?
Philosophy changes also.
Right.
You go from movies like Superman to movies like the X-Men, where and Superman, Batman, all those, they got powers.
Right.
With the X-Men, if you have powers, you're a mutation.
Right.
And you look upon it something negative.
Mm-hmm.
But in this universe over here, we have powers, you look upon something positive.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you go from one genre to another genre, and your philosophy changes. Now you got powers, you're a mutation. You're no good.
Mm-hmm. So you see, all these things come into play. I'm just challenging you maybe to look at the way our media is, and especially the movies that we watch and stuff like that, and just see where they're all over the place when it comes to this.
You know, you talking about Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a made up,
Right.
made up movie.
Right.
And then you got stuff today, and some of it have gone beyond that. And you look at it, it boggles your mind because I knew I was watching the movie. My grandson told me to watch it, right? So I watched it, and I told him I said, I said, this is gone beyond what we have in the movie.
Right.
You know, something else. So I couldn't take it. I told myself, I'm not watching it. I couldn't take no more of it because it was bothering my mind.
Mm-hmm.
You can't take something, you just can't take it. So I'm tired of looking at that.
Right.
Because it's gone beyond that, what they have.
And that's the point I'm thinking. Our imagination has gotten us to the point where we think of evolutionary means, and you see it in everything. It's there, but you don't realize it. Like I said, I never realized about the Star Wars. I just thought, okay, this is a space movie. Until you read that first line. Once upon a time on a galaxy far, far away. Huh.
What movie was it? What movie was it?
I haven't forgotten the name of it. My grandson brought the movie up to the house.
Oh,
I just told him I would watch it, just to make my own decision about it.
Was The Matrix?
It's a new movie. Something it was science fiction. Science fiction, future, all that mixed in. So I said, no. I told Don, his name is Don. I said, Don, no man, don't watch that movie anymore. I told him, I said, it's not good for your mind.
Yeah. It goes back to the Matrix. There's another one.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I'm going to say. You see the point. All right. The argument from the right to privacy. Her privacy over her own body is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Where? According to them, the 14th Amendment, which I read earlier. I was wrong a few moments ago. I said Thurgood Marshall. It was not Thurgood Marshall. It was Justice Blackmun. Justice Blackmun many years ago that did that. All righty. The idea of the argument from rape. No woman should be forced to have a child against her will. Argument from the inability to know when human life begins. All right, here's where the problem is. Does it begin when the baby takes its first breath? Does it begin when it's implanted? Does it begin with the conception? At what point do we call it a human being? That's the question. And, if we're sitting there the whole time arguing about when exactly this becomes a human, then it becomes easier for us to sit down and say, what? It's not a human here, 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 or here, but it is here. Whose standard is that? Whose standard is that? Well, now that's it. We don't know with absolute certainty, according to them. Even if the law does protect the life of a human being, according to them, we don't know when it actually becomes a human being. Therefore, what? You have the right to kill it, abort it if necessary. The argument concerning the autonomous rights of the mother and her consent to sex. A woman's consent to sex is not thereby a consent to pregnancy. Okay, now that's what, again, part of it is. And it violates the rights of her. So the pregnancy should be stopped immediately so as to not violate her rights and her liberty, which has been forced into pregnancy against her will. All righty?
I ate my dinner, but they said fast.
There you go. You made a good point. In case you didn't hear that, I ate my dinner, but I didn't intend on getting fat. So there you go. That's the same argument, right?
I'm thinking about something. They use, this is part of the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
Okay. They use that to justify a woman's freedom. They didn't want her privilege to be violated. But then they take that same document and allow slavery and the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
When they could enforce that, fought against slavery and the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
Like picking and choosing.
Yeah, there you go, brother. I don't mean to be ugly about it, but that's the honest truth. That's the honest truth. You're right. So we have these laws. We strive to make and live by these laws, but we don't always. Let's also be honest. Sometimes even in the church, we know what God wants, what God expects, but we don't always what? Live up to it. And a lot of times we make it say things that it never was intended to say. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So you see people do it with the Constitution just like everything else. Now, here's his argument on page 135. Individuals have a right to privacy and liberty, according to the 14th Amendment, and to pass laws outlawing abortion is to infringe upon an individual's right to privacy and liberty. The unborn are not considered persons under the 14th Amendment because the United States Constitution does not define a person. Well, now, wait a minute. Go back and read this again. All persons born or naturalized in the United States. Well, he doesn't define what the word person means. So therefore, what? Are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. So because the Constitution does not define what a person is, then what? Well, because we can't define exactly when a conception, from the time of conception to the time of birth, when a baby actually becomes a human, therefore it's not a person. So therefore, we can't use this amendment to protect the life of the unborn, only to protect the life or the privacy. Again, this never said anything about privacy, did it? It never said the first thing about privacy, but only to protect the privacy of the woman. To understand that argument, you have to be a lawyer. That's all I'm going to say about that. All righty. He argued that in all instances where the term person is used, it always refers to a postnatal individual with no possible prenatal applications. The second reason he offers that the Texas court could not cite a case in which the court ruled that an unborn human being is a person under the 14th Amendment. So finally, he says that throughout most of the 19th century, not only was abortion practiced, but there were few legal restrictions than those issued in 1972. All right. They then make the argument that society determines when a person's life begins. So an abortionist says an individual becomes a person only when society accepts one as a person. All right. So you might have a little baby in your arms, but if society as a whole says, well, that's not a person. And by the way, this is the argument they make when it comes to deformed children, children with autism, children with all these different diseases and all these different genetic problems. Well, it's not a person. So therefore, we shouldn't be spending all of the money that's what? that we need to take care of these particular beings. We won't call them humans. Let's not call them humans. Let's not call them persons. We're just saying they're beings of some sort. Okay? So they claim, listen, these abortionists claimed that a person only becomes a person whenever you name them. Okay? So when mom and dad, or mom or dad, sign that birth certificate, that's when they become a person. The what? Okay, but I'm just saying, whenever the baby person's birth is one named, he allows to fulfill societal function, then he's accepted into the family. So that only takes place. I didn't realize this, but my children only became people whenever my wife signed the birth certificate. Wow. I don't know that she really realized she had that much power. I'm being facetious here, obviously, you know what I'm saying? I never signed one of the birth certificates. She always did. So the bottom line is, there you go.
So then, okay, now, what about a child back in the 1800s when they didn't keep records? A child was born by a midwife.
Well, that was back in the olden days, and they just didn't know no better. They were living under a whole totally different societal idea, so they were trying to do the best they could under their societal ideas. But look at us, see how far we've traveled, see where our technology has brought us, and therefore what? Now we can tell when there's a difference. Okay? Not. Okay. All right. And again, they argument that intrinsic values are insufficient to determine human values. Some abortionists claim that even if the unborn have a human nature, that's not enough for them to have a right to life. All right, the minute you make that argument, then you could then say, if you want to go ahead and say it, then anybody that has a human nature, that doesn't mean they have a right to live. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, on and on, on and on, on and on. Right? Okay? So, the idea that they're bringing out here is life is only given to those who contribute to society. Now, I want you to think about this for just a minute. Their argument is that the only people that have this right to life is those who contribute to society. So again, think about all of those that are mentally challenged, all of those that are physically challenged in one way or another. If you're not putting money into Social Security or something to help everybody else out, then what? Your life's not worth, anything. We need to just go ahead and get rid of you. You see? That's where this finally will get down to. Now, this is important to understand whenever we really grasp this abortion point, and maybe I am going a little bit more in detail about this because this also explains the infanticide and euthanasia. If we get to the point to where we say that one person is a subhuman or a potential human, then what begins to happen? Then we start doing it with other humans. And other humans would be those that what? That don't agree with us? Well, they're subhuman. They don't think like we do. Therefore, they don't have the right to live, right? Listen to the arguments that some people are making now about Christians. They'll make the argument that what? When we're living by an old stated book, then we believe in a God that doesn't exist. And so we just aren't worthy, we are unworthy to be listened to. So what can we do? We can just dismiss you. We can dismiss you and we can sit back and say what? You're not worthy to live. Think about what happened in Domitian's time whenever he was trying to stamp out Christianity. And go back and study what was going on there. He believed that Rome was really going down the hill. And so when he actually took over as emperor, he said the thing that needs to happen is Rome needs to follow her gods that blessed her many, many years ago during the time of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar and that golden age of Rome. So if we could just get Rome to go back and follow and worship all these gods again, then what? Then things will be better for Rome once again. And so then he sees these Christians who would refuse to fall down and worship these idols. And he says, these people have got to be killed. And so he starts a persecution and is doing all he can to wipe Christianity off the face of the planet. Isn't that interesting? So you see what's happening, what we saw about Hitler and Stalin and everything, this stuff's happened so many times before. People, the moment we lose respect for human life, the moment we sit down and say some people are not fully human or subhuman, that then gives us the right to treat them like dirt, to make them slaves, to make them whatever we want them to make. And then it also gives us the right to kill them if we choose to do so, because they are not contributing in the way that we think of. All right, let's take about a 5-minute break and we'll pick back up with this in a minute. Reset. Okay, coming back.
Question, please.
All right, let's talk about some responses that we've just made to some of these things, okay? Let's reply to the biblical arguments. First off, a response to the biblical argument for viewing the fetus as subhuman. Breath is not the beginning of humanness. In other words, there are several reasons for not taking breath as the point of human's life. The loss of breath would mean the loss of humanness. The Bible is clear that human beings continue to exist in another realm after they stop breathing. Amen? And that's it. Okay, so the bottom line is whenever they quit breathing here, they've gone somewhere else. Story of the I just went down. The parable of come on, Tommy. The rich man and Lazarus. Yeah, parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16. I couldn't remember what it was called. Think about that. They both died. Lazarus went to Abraham's bosom. That was it was described. And the rich man went where? To Hades, a place of torment. So there you go. And they're talking, right? Now you see the problem they have with that is, well, that's just a made up book. So that's just, the Bible is just made up. So therefore what? We don't have to pay attention to that. All right. 2 Corinthians 5, 6 through 8 says what? 2 Corinthians 5 is a passage we read a lot of times at funerals. And we love it because, and actually that's one of those places where, as I've shared before, there's some places in the Bible where some of the chapter divisions are not the best in the world. This is one of them. He talks about the idea in chapter 4, we do not lose heart. Our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. It sounds to me like Paul was talking about what? Outward and inward, the physical body versus the spirit and soul, right? And so the bottom line is there's something more to us than just breath. The soul will go on. And then he says, we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. He said, we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, that mortality may be swallowed up by life. And this is where the passage comes in, where he emphasizes the idea of what? We walk by faith, not by sight. It's one of those passages we jerk out of context, but what is he talking about? In the context of this passage, we are looking for something greater, better than this place, right? And we have something to look forward to after this life, all right? Human life in the loom long before breathing began. He talks about in Psalms 51:5, in sin, in iniquity, my mother conceived me. In Matthew 1:20, Mary, that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. So think about it in this respect. And I want to be challenged on this. Suppose somebody dies. Suppose somebody stopped breathing. We've heard this a lot of times. Ambulance get here, the first thing they do is start pumping oxygen in you as quick as they can, right? And then all of a sudden they get you through that, and you're breathing again. All right. Now, was that person in the moments he was not breathing no longer a human? And did he now become a human again whenever they got the oxygen back in his body? I mean, that's where we would have to come to in that respect. All right. And the verses on breath do not speak of the beginning of human life, but the initial coming out event. And again, that's what we always waited for whenever our children were born. You know, I remember the first one or the second one kind of gave me a little bit of scare. The baby was delivered, and the doctor was holding it and says, "Come on, baby, breathe." And I'm sitting there, "Please, come on, breathe." You know, and I'm like, "Come on." And then finally he took that first breath, and I said, "Shoo." You know what I'm saying? Okay. But he was a baby. He was a human. He was at that moment in time. He was, before he took that first breath, he was that baby, and all so forth. So birth is the human debut into the world. The beginning of observable human life, all right? Not the beginning of actual human life. A baby, the mother can feel an unborn baby move, right? At times even jump. Luke 1:44. Remember, John the Baptist leaped in Elizabeth's womb. So birth was not seen at the beginning of human life, but simply as the beginning or emergence of life in the naturally visible world as the human debut. And think about it this way. If you go to other countries, if you're born in another country, a lot of times they will say the moment you're born, you're already 1 year old. Think about that for just a moment. You're actually 1 year old by that time, because why? Well, you've been in the mother's womb for 9 months. So they will, you know, at the moment of birth, you're 1. And you just get, you know, you just keep adding on. So at that point, next month I'll be 60. Anyway. but you see what I'm trying to say. Some people say, well, Adam was directly created by God. He was a special case. He did not become human until he breathed, according to them. Well, now, wait a minute. Where do you get that idea? It doesn't ever say that he did say he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. But think about this. Number one, Adam was not conceived like every other human. He was created. All right. Secondly, the Adam was not human until he began to breathe. No more proves that when individual human life begins today than it does the fact that he was created as an adult. As he was created as adult. So, think about this for a moment. When God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, he became a living being. But he looked like he was what? 20, 30, 40-year-old man. He's able to walk, talk, do everything just like humans do today. Adults do today. Oh, think about that. He had to be able to do that to be able to enjoy communion with God, did he not?
I'm thinking about, when we talk about the law of absolute, we can apply that to Adam. If he was absolutely dead, then his body would be decaying and stuff. So how can God breathe the breath of life in it until he became? We can, but we practically not. So the law of absolute says that Adam had to be a living being. Because the Bible says he became a living soul.
That's right.
And they say he came alive.
That's right. That's right. So the idea he was created an adult, you know, some people say, well, now wait a minute. If that's the case, if he only became a human being when he's adult, that means what? That we only became human beings when we became adults. So, if that's the case, this, by the way, is an argument that they will go on and make about infanticide. We can kill a child when it's young, out of the womb, because again, what good are they giving to society at that stage of the game? Nothing. This all take, right? I keep making these points because they're very important when we start talking about the ideal of euthanasia. When we start talking about the ideal of taking life, because their quality of life, right? So a person maybe commits suicide. That's his choice. But now we are called, because of our medical ethics right now, we're called a lot of times to make decisions that I don't know that God intended for us to have to make. Okay? We can keep a body alive for years. If we feed the body, if we pump enough oxygen into it, if we keep the heart beating, but is a person at that point in time? And again, here we go again. Here we go with that whole idea of, is it still a human being or not? You know, a man may have a massive brain problem and the brain is shutting down. Well, what begins to happen, this brain is also in control of pretty well everything else in the body. So it shuts down. You can pump all the oxygen into it you want to. You can keep it on a heart-lung machine, whatever else you need to do, but it's still a dead body, right? So the bottom line is that's the point they're trying to make. Think about it in this respect. One more respect, okay? Breath could mean life, Job 33, verse 4. So life began when God gave human life to Adam, not began when he began breathing. All right? Think about this. Other animals are not human, and they breathe, right? Dogs are not human, but they breathe. Cats are not human, but they breathe. So if we start making that point, there we go. Well, then they say, well, okay, then knowledge. We have to have, you see, they're trying to come up with some explanation, okay? At what point does a person or a baby become a human? That's the question. Well, it's what they know. Well, again, proven over and over and over again that baby knows things in the womb. They know things in the womb. They can respond to their mother's voice. They can respond to stimuli. They know things, all right? In Ecclesiastes, he says, he speaks of a stillborn child not knowing anything. But that doesn't mean he was not human, right? He says, those who die, they have no knowledge in the grave, do they? Now, they're not human anymore. What? They're just a dead body, a tent, a tabernacle. It's gone, right? But there we go. So it's making the point that people not in the world cannot enjoy its opportunities. That's the point he's trying to say. If a lack of knowledge renders an individual as a subhuman, then the ignorant would not be human. And again, that kind of goes back down to, you know, we don't hear it anymore because we're not supposed to use these words anymore, but, you know, we actually had levels of intelligence, levels of knowledge. We would talk about an idiot savant, a moron, you know, stupid, going on down the line. Well, now you're not supposed to say those words because it talks about levels of what? Mental awareness and mental knowledge. Paul will talk about the fact that I was ignorant before I became a Christian. Okay, what does that mean? In that situation, he did not have the knowledge of Jesus Christ. So there's that whole ideal in that respect. All right, some people, again, making the argument, the response to the extra biblical arguments. Now, we've given you some ideas from the Bible. Now, let's go back to the ideal of, let's take it out of the Bible again for a moment. Self-consciousness is not necessary to humanness. All right, what about those that are in a coma? They're in a coma. Are they even aware they're alive? We don't know. There's brain activity, but we don't know what they're aware of. We don't know. So therefore, they're not human anymore. Right? Now, again, that's the argument they'll take. If they say, well, you know, there will come a point where we need to what? We need to take them off the ventilator. We need to take them off everything else and let them pass away because they're not human anymore. At what point? And I challenge us always to think about this. And I don't know that we could tell you this answer because biblically, I don't know that there is a way, but it seems like what James tells us, the body without the spirit is what? Dead. So at what point does the spirit leave the body? We can't know that. We can't really know that. We can't really understand that, right? And you see, this is where I was saying earlier that these medical technology and so forth of what we're doing, this is where the problems come in. That's where the problems come in. All righty? Do people wake up from comas? Some do. So, okay, here we go. They got into a coma. If it all boils down to knowledge and using knowledge, while they're in the coma, they're not using any knowledge or anything. Therefore, they're not human. But they wake up. Now they're human again. Well, you want to talk about really confusing, all right? You weren't a human, but now you weren't a human in the womb, but now you are, but then you went into a coma. You're not a human now. But guess what? You woke up, so now you're human again. What? Seriously now, let's just think this thing through a little bit. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Yes, sir.
for the child. Oh, I'm thinking about baby. A baby has, you know what a woman has a baby.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't leave that baby in there by itself. The baby has to have attention. The baby has to have your love.
Right.
Pick up, hug, touch. That baby it has to have that. Because if it don't, it'll die.
That's right.
It'll just die.
That's right.
But you can't just leave a child alone,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and not without any affection, a love, any caring. But you gotta have that. First will do the same thing.
That's right.
If they don't have any love and care, somebody don't care about them, they'll just wither away too. That's why we are human. That's why we are human.
Yes, we are human. Okay. What is a coma?
Suspended
What is a coma?
deep sleep.
Deep sleep. All right. Jerome, when you go into sleep, deep sleep tonight, you're not human anymore. But when Rosalind wakes you up in the morning, you become a human again. You see the problems with this? No, he's still human. I mean, just think of the absurdity of what we're talking about. You know, if that's the case, then if it, you know, number one, it all boils down to self-consciousness. What does that mean? What exactly? Well, you're conscious of yourself. You're conscious that you're different from other people. When does a child really understand that? Well, we don't know. Again, our children are learning so many things in the first year and a half. They're learning to talk, you know, hearing voices. They know what mama's voice is and everybody else. They can tell whether somebody's angry at them or not just by the tone of the voice. They can, you know, you think about everything that a child learns from a year and a half. All right. You know, we watch our grandchildren, and I watch them a lot of times, and I see them, and even before they could talk or anything, they could tell whenever I wasn't very happy. You know, whenever they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, they knew they shouldn't have been doing it. They kind of looked at me, you know, and they knew it. So they have that self-consciousness. All right. Well, also think about it in this respect. If that's the case, then we can find any unconscious person and we can go ahead and kill them because they're not humans anymore. You see the problems with this? You see where it takes us to? Secondly, an embryo is not an extension of the mother. It's a scientific fact that embryos are not physical extension of their mothers. From the moment of conception, they have their own sex. They're slightly more than half are male, while the mother is female. In other words, slightly more than half of babies conceived are male. Beginning about 40 days after conception, they have their own individual brain waves, which they keep until death. Within a few weeks of conception, they have their own blood type. Isn't that interesting? Think about that for a few moments. Their mother is feeding them with her blood, right? But whenever the baby comes out and they take its type, it may be a totally different blood type than mom's. Wow, what's happened? What's going on there? Again, they have their own unique fingerprints. Again, all that's going on in the mother's womb is the baby is nesting. Okay, it's nesting in the womb until it's time for it to get out of the womb. All right, so embryos are no more part of the mother's body than a nursing baby is part of the mother's breast or a test tube baby is part of a petri dish. It's a very good point. So distinct they are so that, you know, if a fertilized ovum from a black couple is transplanted into a white mother, she'll have a black baby, right? Even though she's white. So all of this stuff comes into play there. Well, somebody says, well, it's the transmission of hormonal signals. When does life begin? At conception? Or how is it protected and nourished after it's conceived? At the point of conception, no genetic information is passed on. I mean, the moment they're conceived, there's no more genetics they need. They've got everything they need to become a human being at that moment in time. Mom doesn't pass on any more information to that baby anymore. Third, according scientifically and metaphysically, there's no difference between the communicative unborn and after implantation and the non-communicative unborn before implantation. So again, the point is again, they make the statement, well, it could have been we could have, I've lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. The point I'm trying to say is this: the differences of location and relation, but they have no essential nature of the unborn. It's a baby at the moment of conception. Think about this. The reliance of material molecules. Well, they say, well, mom has to have molecules that bring oxygen to the baby to keep it alive. True or false? That's true, right? They have to be able to do that. But again, the bottom line is, whenever I'm sick, I go to a doctor. Now, that's a whole totally different human being than me. Whole different genetic material. Now, we are humans. We agree with that. But a totally different genetic information. And he looks at me and he says, you're sick. So he gives me antibiotics. Now, these antibiotics are what? They are, we call them pills or something like that, but sometimes they are things that kill other what? Other organisms, right? So you got the genetics of the antibiotics that's coming into my system. It's helping me kill the other thing that's in my system, the bacteria, the microorganisms. So the bottom line is, but there's no genetic things passed on. In other words, that antibiotic may stay in my system for a while, but it will be eliminated from my system. It hasn't changed who I am. It hasn't changed the way I think. It hasn't changed anything because it's different. All righty? Legalized abortion does not save lives. Legalizing abortion has not saved thousands of mothers from dying, but it has killed millions of babies. All right? Before the legalization of abortion, there were not thousands of women dying each year from illegal abortions. That's what we hear, right? Thousands of women are dying every year because of illegal abortions. No, they weren't, because there weren't that many people doing it. All right? According to the U.S. Bureau of Vital Statistics, reported in 1973, the year of the Roe versus Wade decision, they said only 45 maternal deaths took place from abortion. 45 women died from abortion. 45. Not thousands, 45. All righty? Bernard Nathanson, who is one of the original leaders of the abortion movement, later admitted that proponents of abortion lied about the statistics. Surprise, surprise, surprise. They would lie to prove their point? Okay. The maternal death rate for childbirth is 1 in 10,000 births, or 1/100th of 1%. Childbirth is one of the safest medical procedures in the country. Child mortality rate from abortion is 100%. Right? So it's the most fatal operation in America. If the embryo is human, then saving even hundreds of mothers would not justify killing millions of babies. All right, what about the autonomous rights of the mother's body? This position wrongly assumes that only the mother's rights are in view. Now, let's stop here for just a minute. Let's talk about this. We have to be sympathetic to women in the fact that a lot of women are struggling with a lot of things, okay? And a lot of times they may have come up from a home that did not love them, so they're trying to find love. You know what I mean? You can't see me, I'm doing this number. They're trying to find love. They have sex with a man thinking he loves her. He dumps her after he gets what he wants. We're living in a sinful world, we're being honest. Now she has to live with the consequences of that decision that she made. We think about a woman again that was raped, and of course she had no choice in the matter. We need to be sympathetic to these. We need to be loving and sympathetic and do all that we can to help them in every way that we can. But two wrongs don't make a right. Killing the baby because of the situation does not make it right. Well, Tommy, you don't understand because you're not a woman. Okay? It goes back to, if we're Christians, we've got to be sympathetic. Now think about what happened years ago. I remember reading whenever I was in high school, I had to read the Nathaniel Hawthorne book, The Scarlet Letter. You remember how that whole book played out. This woman was branded for being an adulteress, right? But she carried the baby, and she dealt with the shame, and but she never would tell them who impregnated her. Come to find out, it was the preacher, right? And you think about the shame and all that she went through. Think about years ago, there used to be a lot of shame for an unwed mother, right? Adultery is a sin. So is lying, and so are these others. And I think we did have this tendency to look down on some sins as worse than others, because again, think about it. Some sins are worse. Jesus will talk about he who has what? Delivered you to me has committed the greater sin. So there are greater sins and lesser sins. But I think sometimes the way the church and the world handled it was more condemning than supportive. And so as a result, we still have that reputation today, do we not? I submit unto you that what Jesus came to do, he came, and think about some of the people he dealt with. The people that he seemed to show the most grace to were the women that were the woman taken in adultery in John 8. The woman of Luke 7 who came and washed his feet with her hair. And Simon the Pharisee, who said if this man were a prophet, what? He would know what kind of woman this was. Sometimes we in the church have been a little bit more condemning than we, and don't get me wrong, please don't get me wrong. Please understand what I'm saying. We have to condemn sin, but we have to preach forgiveness. If we leave people with the idea they can never be better and that there's no hope, they'll walk away. There's a balance there. And I don't know that I got it figured out 100% about the balance, but there has to be the balance. People make mistakes. People sin. If they're my brother or my sister in Christ and they've made a bad decision and they decide to keep the baby, but she comes forward and asks for forgiveness, what should we do? Support her and love her with open arms and help her through whatever else she's having to go through, whatever else it's going to take. And that might mean money, and that means, whenever the baby's here, you might have to get people to help take care of the baby while she's going working on a job or something like that. And you see, now we're talking about something, well, Tommy, that's going to take some time, but isn't that what discipleship's all about? And I have to put myself out there like Jesus did. I have to get involved in people's lives. I don't want to preach a sermon here, but to me, it's we've gone from one way to the other in the church. We used to be so condemning that people would never come back because they would always feel like they're being judged. On the flip side, now we've come to the point to where we have so much grace that we don't even challenge anybody about the sin in their lives. Both extremes are wrong. Amen. So, going back to what I was saying, we need to be sympathetic to these women in this situation. We do not need to condone what they did. Again, if it was a rape, then we need to even show that much more compassion. Right? I mean, I'm just being as honest with you as I could be. Because it wasn't anything that she meant to do, and it wasn't anything that she want to have happen. I think, again, the church's response needs to be totally different than what it's been in times past. And I'm using a blanket statement. I'm sure that there were those that were trying to take care of these women and trying to do what they could. But if we're sitting there condemning abortion, but we're not really giving a woman that's been put in that situation where either she's made a bad decision or she was forced to do something she did not want to do, where is our compassion? So, having said that, we need to understand and know in certain terms that that's it. We need to help them. The baby's right to life conflicts with a mother's right to control her own body. Sometimes she had no control over that. But that, if she was raped, that does not give the right to kill the unborn child. Now, this is tough, isn't it? And I wonder sometimes how many of us have really thought this thing through. And as I was thinking about this, I was really, really meditating upon this a great deal. Again, this is where the church could shine. This is where the church should shine. I went to a couple of weeks ago, I went to the Georgia Agape banquet, and it talked about this woman that was having problems with her child and children. She was a single mom. She'd been involved with drugs. She had 3 children. The state took the children away from her. And so they put her with they put the children with another lady in Georgia Agape. And this lady took them into her home, treated like they were her own children, took care of them, helped mom get her act together to where mom now has the children again. See, that's what it takes. But you know what? That's more than just throwing money at it. That's more than just that's people getting involved and doing what you can to help that situation. And what was really interesting is I was listening to the story. I was really impressed with the fact that the 3 children that were taken out of the home were white, and the lady that took care of them in Georgia Agape was black. And she loved them enough to let them know, look, I know you've got a problem with me being black and you're white, but you know what? We're going to work through this. And I remember, you see, that's just one small story. Here's the thing. We need to be thinking about this constantly. And the fact of what can we do to help. All righty? Some people say, well, we need to have abortion so that so much child abuse is there. Again, abortion is worse than child abuse. Abortion always ends with the death of the child. Always. 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 So while child abuse is wrong, it's heinous, it needs to be disciplined, it needs to be, whoever does it, it should be punished. We need to understand. Think about this. One of the things he pointed out here, and I didn't realize this until I was reading this, but think about this. He said, abortion is child abuse of the worst kind, abuse by cruel death. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services figures, between 1973 and 1982, child abuse increased more than 500% from the time of abortion to 11 years later. Child abuse increased 500%. But their argument is, no, let's abort the babies because they may be abused. Well, if that's the case, and we've had all of these abortions, then why has child abuse increased? If your argument is true, child abuse should have gone in the tank, right? But no, that's not it. One study showed that 91% of abused children were wanted children. In other words, they wanted to have children. Now, you get into the question now, what exactly do you define abuse? Is it a parent not knowing how to discipline a child? Possibly. We've redefined that whole issue, right? You can't hit a child. You can't spank a child. Why? That's abuse. That child can call what? They can call defects on you in a heartbeat and you think you have problems, right? And so there's that situation. Could it be the generations of rearing? Maybe. Could it be that sometimes maybe parents are upset and they get a little bit angry and they go too far? Probably. But again, the bottom line is we need to think about it in this respect. Abortion hadn't solved the child abuse problem. In fact, if anything, it's made it worse in that if we start thinking that one life isn't worth, then we could start treating other people the same way. In other words, I don't know if you're really that a human or not. And see, the moment we start going down that road where you're a subhuman, if we do it with children, we do it with babies, the most innocent among us, what will we do with people that we come into contact with that we don't like? Will we then say, you're subhuman? I don't even need to talk to you? You know, we holler at one another on Facebook and fuss at one another, and we do it that way. Why? Why? because I'm hiding behind Facebook. I don't have to actually sit down and talk to them and really work the problems out. I submit unto you that because of abortion and so forth like that, we have gotten to the point to where it's kind of leading us to even further disunity, for lack of a better term. Why? Well, look at some of the posts on Facebook. You don't agree with me, then you're not a human. I could treat you any way I want to. Why? Well, you don't agree with me. Am I correct? All right. Some people say, well, okay, what about let's abort those that are going to be deformed? Again, this makes sense only if the unborn are not human, which begs the question. If the unborn are human, then abortion of the deformed is no more justified than infanticide or euthanasia for genetic reasons. Abortion of the handicapped is not supported by handicapped people. Okay? You don't see them supporting that. All righty? It is not the handicapped or their parents who want abortions of babies. It is those who are not handicapped and not speak to their parents who favor abortions. Let's allow the handicapped to live and speak for themselves. What about privacy rights? The problem in the right to privacy argument for abortion is that it brings us face to face again with the basic issue: are the unborn? This is the whole issue right here. Are they human? That's the question. All right? Justifying abortion on the ground of privacy makes good sense only if the embryo is not a human being. Again, think about it this way: we do not have the right to privately kill human beings. Suppose me and you disagree in class, and I take you out, and I shoot you, and I kill you. What's going to happen to me? Huh? And the whole Cobb County Police Force will be on me in a few minutes, and I'll be charged with murder and the whole. Why? Well, I'll just sit back and say, well, now wait a minute. He disagreed with me. I know I'm human, but because he disagreed with me, he's subhuman. I just took him out. We don't need his genetic material in the gene pool anymore. You're sitting there thinking to myself, well, this is great, but this is about what the whole argument boils down to with abortion, right? Think about that for just a moment. That's exactly right. All right. Abortionists would have to argue that we also have the right to engage in child abuse or rape as long as it's done privately. In other words, anything that I can do privately, then what? No big deal. But you have no right to kill privately. Abortion of human beings is significantly different from evicting somebody from your home. Remember I talked about earlier about somebody coming in and attaching yourself to your refrigerator to feed themselves? He said, no, that's a different thing. Abortion is more like killing an indigent person in our home because that person will not leave. After all, evicting a non-viable embryo is fatal. Third, with the exception of criminal rape, no pregnancy is unwilled. If one consents to the act that brings about that, then one is responsible for the result of that act. So, think about this. He makes the statement in 99% of abortions, the guest was invited to begin with. Right? The guest was invited to begin with. That being the case, the abortion is more like inviting an indigent guest to our home and then killing them or evicting them to make sure death simply because they're not wanted.
I just thought about something. We have cases where a woman gets killed by whoever, and she's pregnant. That person gets charged with, I think, 2 counts.
2 counts of murder. Isn't that the silliest thing in the world? If that baby is not human. Now, you see, so what has happened? Well, because she wanted the child, therefore it's human. Just because she wanted the child? It's not human if she doesn't want the child? You see where it gets us in all these silly contradictions. You make a very, very valid point there. If the baby dies, then it's a case of 2 capital murders. And so you have a state that sanctions abortion, But then if a woman is killed and her baby is killed at the same time, it's 2 deaths. That's hypocrisy. There's no consistency in that, right? So, again, what about rape? It's an emotionally charged issue, right? But the rape of the mother does not justify the murder of the child. If the unborn is human, then intentionally taking its innocent life is murder. It does not take away, abortion does not take away the evil of the rape. It adds another evil to it. So, if a rape victim sometimes receives immediate medical treatment, then conception can be avoided in all cases. It goes on down through there. The figure for criminal rape with children being aborted is under 1%. In the cases where pregnancy does occur, about half of the rape victims want to have the baby. Okay? In the woman whose generic name was Jane Roe, who alleged rape led to the Roe versus Wade case overthrew, she has later admitted that she lied, thus undermining the whole case to begin with. And go back and read that story. Response to the argument from the inability to know when human life begins. You know, here it is. Ronald Reagan said, if you're not sure, don't shoot. You know, and he's talking about this on his book of abortion. All right. So, laws of logic demand that we know either that it is a human organism in person or that it is not. So, the thing is, the organism is a person and we know it. The organism is a person and we do not know it. The organism is not a person and we do not know it. Or the organism is not a person and we do know it. So, if it is clear that we know it's a person and we kill it, that's a homicide. If we, again, the second case is, if the organism is a person and we don't know it, then it's at least manslaughter. You can't plead ignorance because you didn't know a person was there. I was out here not too long ago, before y'all came. I don't know how, it was a few months ago. And somebody was shooting a gun right out here in the back. Now, if that gun had come through and hit me, I mean, I was standing outside. If that gun, the bullet had come through and hit me and killed me, that would have been manslaughter. Why? Well, I didn't know they were out there. Doesn't matter. It would have been manslaughter. So the thing that he makes his point is this. He says they didn't know they was there either. You can't plead ignorance because you didn't know a person was there. Rick Warren talked to President Obama in a pre-election interview. And Obama claimed that that is above my pay grade to know whether life begins at conception. So if so, then it's also above his pay grade to know that it does not begin at conception and that it's permissible to kill millions of babies, which is what his pro-Roe versus Wade opinion boils down to. All right, the third case, the fetus is not a person, but that is not known with certainty. Well, that's just as irresponsible. At least the abortion should be charged with manslaughter, for they did not know, but they still acted criminally to abort the baby, right? Well, I don't know if it's really a human or not. Well, if you don't know, then you're committed manslaughter because why? You still killed a being. All right? On the fourth case, and only the fourth case, the organism is not a person and we know it's not a person. That's the only place where abortion would be reasonable, legal, and responsible. But again, nobody knows this with certainty. The organism may be a human person, and if it's a human person, then it's murder. That's the end of it. All right? Response to the consent of sex. If it's known that pregnancy is a possible result of sex, then a mother is giving tacit consent to have the baby when she has sex. If nothing else, she's playing Russian roulette and is responsible if the trigger goes off. More important, this view begs the question by assuming that the unborn is not human. If the unborn is human, then the mother has no right to kill the fetus on the grounds that she did not consent to the fetus coming into being. Right? That makes no sense either, right? There is that possibility whenever you have those relations that a baby will be born, right? So, again, I want to look at page 141. This is the point that Justin Blackmun made here. Response to the 14th Amendment argument. The difficulty with Justin Blackmun's Roe versus Wade criticism, he refers only to cases that apply to already existing persons. He cites the U.S. Constitution Fugitive Slave Law, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3, and the migration and importation provision. Both of these provisions had already been eliminated by the 13th and 14th Amendment of already existing individuals. So again, whenever he made that statement, he was not talking about, but he was referring only to cases where people were already existing. So if it's the case that everyone that do not hold, think about this, these references seem to beg the question because they imply that because a fetus cannot hold these offices, then that individual is not a person. So if that's the case, and I like what he said, these references seem to beg the question. If they imply that because a fetus cannot hold these offices of a congressman or a senator, then that individual is not a person. If that's the case, all of us in here are not people, and all of us in here are not human, because I don't know of any of you that served either as a representative or a congressman or a senator. Okay? Is what he finds in the read apart. If you go back and read the 14th Amendment, the whole thing, it will talk about that they have privileges. People have privileges. All righty? And he emphasizes the idea representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. Okay? No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any military office having previously taken an oath if he is engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. 1868. And the point is, and this is what they were doing at that point in time, is that you can't hold an office if you've rebelled against the United States. And that was mainly against the Confederates that had been beaten, right? So what happens when all them died? Well, there you go, brother.
There's something we haven't talked about, and that is, you know, we talk about abortion a lot and everything, but sometimes it depends on who it is and the family it is and things like that. You know, the woman might decide that, well, I don't want to keep this baby. I can't take it. I can't do this. I can't do that. But then somebody family might say, well, hey, might be a brother or sister, or might be an aunt or a cousin. Everybody listen, but you know, if they think that she was planning on avoiding the baby, you know, maybe you can talk to her and tell her, say, listen, you don't want to keep the baby. You don't want to keep the baby. Why don't you let so-and-so, a family, you know, a family that don't have children, or
Right.
white man, they didn't have the child.
Right.
So you put the child up for adoption, you know.
Yeah.
Don't just go ahead and just do it because, you know, you think you can't do it. Let's give someone else opportunity. I mean, these things have to be taught, and they have to be talked to the woman about too, you know, or your relative.
Right.
Because it affects all our family. We know somebody that's done had an abortion, you know, in their family, you know, and then they want the child, but they want to keep it secret so they didn't talk to nobody about it.
Right. And you make a very good point, but I want you to again challenge you to think about this. The laws to adopt a child now and the costs are astronomical. And nobody's helping these people pay for these costs. So while we can and should make that argument that, yeah, they could and should adopt these children, the reality is, and you think about it, we're talking about 1.5, 2 million abortions per year in this country. That's a lot of parents that's needed. And who's going to help them go through the legal system to get these babies to where they can be taken care of? To me, that's a whole nother discussion at a whole nother time, is to what extent government has overreached. And, you know, what's the government all about? I don't mean this ugly, but I'm being honest. It's all about money. Really. You get to be a congressman or senator by the people that pays for the right. So again, they're not going to do anything that's going to encourage adoption. They're certainly not going to pay for it. Somebody's got to pay for it. And the tragedy of it is that a lot of the parents that would like to pay for it or like a child, they can't afford it. So there you go. That's a whole other issue as well, in and by itself. You see, we are talking about Christian ethics and trying to,
I'll give you an idea of cost. I adopted my son in 1961, and I believe the cost at that time was $5,000. I'm not sure.
That's 61. Yeah.
I think it was pretty, I knew it was more than I had, but we managed to get it.
Yeah. So now we're in 2016, which is about 58 years later. I imagine the costs are probably pushing 100,000 or more.
What?
Probably.
To adopt a child?
Let's look it up. We got Google. How much does it cost to adopt a child? Okay, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I apologize. Please, I'm glad you challenged me here. Here's what Adoption Network said. Private domestic adoption costs vary from adoption to adoption and state to state. An agency fee ranges from $15,000 to $30,000. That's just the agency fees. That's not all the other fees. The lawyer fees, the court costs, and all that other stuff. You're talking anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. If you adopt a healthy newborn or baby or adopt from another country, it can cost from $5,000 to $40,000.
Wow.
So when I was saying 100,000, I just compared it from what he had to pay in 1961 to what money's worth now compared to what it was back then. So that's why I was guessing maybe closer to $100,000.
So,
Let's say 30,000.
30,000 is still very high. That's right. Yeah.
where in the world does this money go?
You've got to pay for the attorneys. You've got to pay the court costs. You've got to pay for all these people to make sure where does all the money go when you close on a house? Okay. Now multiply that because you're dealing with what? You're dealing with children here. You think about buying a house. And our closing cost on our house was close to $8,000. All right, you got titles, and again, in all of this, who's in the middle of all of it? Attorneys, lawyers. So you've got all of this money that you spend to buy a house, $8,000 to $10,000. That's, and that's rolled into the loan up front, right? So you figure out, okay, when you're adopting a child, you can't very well, nobody can come after the child to get the money. If something bad happens, you got to have all that money up front, right?
But like Brother Miles was saying, there are situations where a family member may take the child.
Right. And that's
they don't go through adoption.
That's right.
But I guess after so long, you're considered the legal guardian.
Right.
So
there's part of that, but then think also about the fact, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, it goes back also to the fact that whenever you're willing to do that, you're going to be out money, clothes, food, shelter, everything they're going to need to go to school and everything like that. It costs a bunch of money to raise children. So there you go. Yeah. Call Georgia Agape up and ask them how much it costs to adopt a child through them. All right. Just see that way to give you a better idea of what's going on in this state. Every state's going to have different adoption laws. Every state's going to have different things going on. So yeah, brother.
I think it's also a way to get down in what a person can afford.
Right.
See, some people limit the size of their family, and they already have this plan, like with their wives.
Right.
And they talk about it, and they say, well, hey, that's how many children. Well, I think the man probably saying, I'm over there. Well, he can't have. he can't have the children. His wife can have the children. He
Right.
can't have the, but he might say, well, honey, let's have 3 children. Wife might say, no, let's have 2, honey. That's all we can afford.
Mhm.
You see, that way they put it out there already.
Right.
It does come down to how much money you make, but you and your wife have money together. I know doctors, yeah, but you see, the doctor's making a lot of money. So he had like 5 kids, and they were all little kids.
Mhm.
I told him, I said, Doctor, maybe you and your wife, I mean, I didn't say you've been busy. I just said, you plan things out.
Right.
But see, he did that because he and his wife, talked about it. And they could plan it out too. But they had no one. It was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it was like, he and his wife had the children like 1 year apart.
Right. Stair
Like
steps.
that.
Yeah.
See, but all those kids were little.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were small kids.
Yeah.
And I was complimenting him by the kids,
Mhm.
because I saw them. And I said, man, you got a lot of little children. But why he planned that way? And they planned that.
Right.
So it depends on what people's income is, how they be raised, all kinds of things.
Mhm.
Families do not like the part, especially families that, that cheat together. They don't like to, be apart from that. There's somebody that's their relative.
Right.
The relative can't do something about it. I mean, they can try to talk to them and tell them, look, why don't you keep the baby in the family? Let your sister take care of the baby. You don't want the baby. Sister take care of the baby.
Right.
That happens too.
Right.
Because they love family.
That's right.
Not everybody like that, but a lot of people are.
Right. Right. So we continue on. We've got about another 30 minutes. We've really spent a lot of time talking about some of these things. I'm not wanting to go through all of this. We've made a lot of headway, but at the same time, we've got so much to cover. Response to the argument that society determines when a person has rights. There are many Eastern cultures that celebrate the personhood of a fetus from conception. Remember, I told you whenever the baby's born, they're already, as far as they're concerned, 1 year old, right? An Eastern child will be a person and a Western child will not. Well, what about if you're an Eastern child living in the West? All right, if it's society, you're living in a different society that doesn't count it the way you do. Are you right or are they wrong? Whatever. Think about, again, some people will talk about the idea not all cultures allow children to be accepted in society at the same time and in the same way. Some Christians baptize infants. Now think about, we are a society as a church, right? We are a group, but we won't baptize infants. Why? Because they have not sinned, right? You have to understand that. The Jews perform a bar mitzvah at the age of 13, 12, 13. That's when they're allowed into their community. All right. So you've got that different thing there. Again, there's some people that have the idea that a fetus is potentially human. Go to Exodus 21, 23 and 23. If men strive and hurt a woman with child so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him. And if any mischief follows, then she shall give life for life. Now, a lot of people say, well, here's what it's talking about. A woman has a child and mischief follows. She has, because they're in a fight and a man hurts a woman that has a child and she has the baby right after that. Okay. Now, the point they make is if the woman was not hurt and she's okay, then that's all we got to worry about. But the context of this passage emphasizes the idea that if the baby was harmed, then there would have to be life for life. Okay? But some people try to make the argument that they're just potentially human. Says, no, the only way that you would give life for life under that situation is if the woman died. If the baby died, it really didn't matter. I disagree with that. I believe it is, I believe he's talking about the baby as well. All right? Psalms 139, you were created in my ownmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. So they say that a fetus is not fully human because it's in the process of being knit together. Well, again, the bottom line is that's not it. They're saying they're potentially human. Then they make the argument human personality develops only gradually. Human development is interconnected with physical development. An egg is not a chicken, so a fetus is not a human. And they make that an acorn is a potential oak tree. Well, Exodus 21 does not teach that a fetus is a potential human, but the word to come forth is yasa, which means to give birth. So if she gives birth and that baby dies, then the unborn was considered with the equal value of the mother. All righty. Psalms 51:5 does not support the potential human view for several reasons. Even if it were teaching that humans are potential sinners from conception, it would not follow that they are potential humans. I do not agree with the fact that they are potential sinners from birth. Okay, I do not agree with that. So we got to make that clear as well. So again, personality differs from personhood. I can tell you that for a fact. All three of my sons were different. I have 6 granddaughters, and I could sit here and regale you how from birth every one of them are different in their own certain special ways. One of the children are very close to me. I got her to walk when she was 9 months old. She come walking to me at 9 months old. We were living at home with her, so but she's got an attitude on her that's bigger than Texas. And she's only 4 now. Okay? She has a sister. Now, her sister is also got an attitude. She's only 2, but the bottom line is the way the first one will get upset over the littlest thing and she'll come crying, and the other one, she could take a beating. And I'm talking about this girl has accidentally dropped a curling iron on her arm, burned her arm bad. And she just got off and shook it off and walked on her merry way. And her mama said, "What did you do?" And her mama, if it wasn't for the fact her mama saw it, she wouldn't have known what had happened. That's just the way she is. Different personalities, same parents, different personalities. So you see, that's part of it. Personality differs from personhood. They're both persons. They're both humans, but they both have different personalities. The soul does not have to change with the body. Simply because the body develops does not mean the soul does. Okay? So you think about the idea. As Christians, we talk a lot about the soul and the spirit and the body. The body without the spirit is dead, right? Hopefully, in our classes, we are trying to encourage people to grow spiritually. And hopefully, I'd like to see giants where I might just see mere men and women. I want to see giants in spirit. I want to have a giant spirit. You know what I'm saying? So there it is. I like page 148, biblical arguments for viewing the fetus as fully human. Again, those passages on page 148 and 149 are very, very important. And I think we would need to use that if we're ever getting into a discussion with this. At least now, hopefully, we'll be able to discuss somebody honestly and vividly what's going on in that respect. And we'll be able to give a good approach toward that. All righty. What if a mother's life is threatened? Again, there's a different thing. I saw something the other day on TV. I sometimes watch this show, Untold Stories of the Yar. And there was a lady that had been trying to get pregnant and she hadn't, so they were in the middle of trying to adopt, and all of a sudden she got very sick and they rushed her to the hospital and found out that she was pregnant herself, but she also had, and this was interesting, she already had a baby in the womb, but she had another baby in her fallopian tube. And they had to do surgery to, the baby in the fallopian tube was going to kill her. It had not planted in the womb, so therefore it was going to kill her because, why? because she would have ruptured and it would have killed her. So they went in there, took that baby, but saved the other baby. All right. Now, what's the difference in that situation? Well, the baby in the womb was where it was supposed to be, nestled, and it was posed no threat to the mother. That baby was later born. They had to take the other baby because it would have killed the mother, and then it would have killed the other one in the womb and the mother as well. So it's like amputation. You know, if my feet are getting to the point to where they're gangrenous, I got to have it cut off or it's going to kill the whole body. So again, the thing that I need to think about in that respect, you've got all of this coming together. All these things have to be taken into consideration. One other thing that I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about is the idea of the quality of life argument. All right. Well, these babies need to be aborted because, you know, they just won't have a good quality of life. The question is always boiled down to this: who says what the quality of life is? If you're talking to a rich man, a quality of life is living in a 10-room or 12-room mansion, 14,000 feet. I'm thinking of a mansion right now that's not too far from my house that has 14 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, 14,000 square feet in it, worth $9 million. It's also sitting on 44 acres of land. This place was up not too long ago. All right, now what is their quality of life? They get whatever they want, whenever they want it, anytime they want it, because they're rich. I mean, if you're spending that much money for a house, you can do pretty well what you want because you've got the money, right? Your quality of life is a whole lot further than mine. Okay? I'm a preacher. I'm not making anywhere near that. I'm not even making 6 figures. You know what I'm trying to say? So I'm living in this smaller house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. You know what I'm trying to say in that respect? We're making it. I'm not eating filet mignon every night. I'm not eating lobster. I'm not eating crab. I'm eating hamburger and French fries. And you know what I'm saying? Okay? Who determines what the quality of life is? When you get into that argument, it becomes more subjective than objective. You don't have an objective way. So for the Christian, the quality of life really boils down to what? For the Christian, the quality of life is, what is your relationship with Jesus Christ? Right? So I'm not going to be all that concerned about the material things of this life. That's the quality of life. All right? It's a subjective standard. Some people say that a person should not be considered a person until they've developed a brain and consciousness. Well, again, the fetus lacks human appearance. Well, you know, I've met some people that's been hurt that don't always look exactly like human beings, okay? On and on we could go. This whole argument all the way through this whole thing just brings out to the point, and I love this point because once we've got this chapter down, it gives us up to the point where we then begin to understand this infanticide and euthanasia. He makes the point in chapter 10 that the abortion arguments are the same arguments used for killing a baby outside the womb and for killing an older person when they're at the end of their life. I briefly want to bring out this idea. We'll look at this in more detail next week, but I briefly want to bring out this idea that, God is the one who gives us life. God is the one who takes our life from us. The biggest issue I see with this euthanasia argument is that what happens in a lot of cases, and especially in Colorado, Washington, some of these other places, Oregon especially, they've already made laws to where if you wish to die, then you can go to your doctor, get the necessary poison or narcotics or whatever, get you an overdose, and you kill yourself. That is suicide. Now again, that takes God out of the picture. We're saying in essence that we have the right to choose when we die. There's passive euthanasia, where we withhold food and water until the person dies. And then there's actual active euthanasia, where we're giving them medicine to help them to die. Having lost my mother-in-law earlier this year, this is a very touchy subject with me, obviously. She was hurting all the time, aching all the time. She could get no relief. Part of her problem is that she wasn't going to do what the doctor told her to do a lot of times. She just got tired of living. She just wanted to quit. And no amount of talking on our part could do anything one way or another. You know what I'm saying? She was just bound and determined. She just wanted to die. Now, and that's between her and God. I don't know to the extent of what she was suffering. I don't know to the extent of how she's hurting. I was not feeling what she was feeling. But she had fought diabetes. She had had major open heart surgery back years ago. Doctors kept telling her that she's going to need another one. And she said, I'm not going through that again. Period. End of discussion. It's not going to happen. I'm just not going to do it. So it gets down to the whole ideal of, all right, did she in essence choose to kill herself? Or did she not want to be put through all the misery of yet another surgery, all the rehab, all that other stuff, just to be given another few years of life when she might die from something else? She was 81. So she just refused treatment. We honored her wishes. We took her back to the house. Had hospice come in. Hospice told her that we had anywhere from 3 to 6 months. From the time hospice came in to the time she died was 1 week. I don't know if hospice was trying to get us to make a lot of decisions because she may have had longer. I don't know. But the bottom line is that she made up her mind she didn't want to live anymore. So would it have been wrong for us to force her to be in the hospital, take the IV fluids, take all that other stuff? And she was also a Christian. And, you know, she was getting sicker and sicker every time she listens to the news. I do too. You know what I'm saying? And you're sitting there just like, really, I can't believe this. But you're sitting there thinking, yes, I'm looking for a home. Okay. Now, I'm much younger than her. She was, obviously. But I get to thinking about it. Did she make that choice to die? Well, number one, we didn't give her any narcotics. They didn't give her any narcotics. The only time that she was given any narcotics was literally right before she died. Because, and I still to this day, I'm not sure exactly what happened. And I'm sharing with you my heart story here because just kind of it's a very close story for me. We didn't poison her. We didn't do anything. This was her wishes. This is what she wanted. She was tired of living. The only time whenever she had a morphine, and of course, from what I understood from her husband, she was allergic to morphine. So I don't know if that's what got her or what, but the only time was, like I said, about 30 minutes before she died. And they wanted her moved. She was laying in her recliner. And they wanted her moved to a hospital bed to where she can breathe easier. She was kind of hunched over and all like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's what needs to happen or not. Well, that's what you need to do because she ain't going to make it through the weekend. Okay? All right. So we get a hospital bed in there. Me and the guy that brought the hospital bed in, we moved her. Now, I've worked at funeral homes for many years. I know how to move a body. All right. So I got the blanket up under her, rolled her over. We got the blanket on the other side. We picked her up. We got her to the bed. She cried out in pain. The guy walked out the door. 5 minutes later, she was dead. Now, to this moment in time, I can't I can't say it for sure. That was between God and her, but I think moving her made her die quicker. Okay, that's just my personal opinion. But she said these hospice people said that that's what needed to happen. So we did it. Like I said, within 5 minutes after moving her, she was gone. Now, we did not kill her in that sense. In the fact of the nurse gave her the morphine. We didn't, because she knew it was going to hurt her to move her. We did not withhold food from her. We begged her to eat. She refused it. So it's not active euthanasia. If anything, we were sitting there, and I wouldn't even go so far as to say it was passive euthanasia. It was her decision to leave this world the way she left it. I think at the same time, I've been in places in intensive care units where people have been put on respirators and they have automatic pacemakers kicked into their heart, and they're just laying there. They're not there anymore. Medical science, as I said, has caused us to get to the point to where we can live longer, but it's also, I think, and I'm sharing with you my heart, made us have to make decisions that we shouldn't have had to make. The moment you decide to put somebody on a respirator, and again, a lot of things come into play there. If a person is in a motorcycle accident, they're young, they're healthy, the doctor seems to think everything's going to be all right, and they're put on a ventilator, that's different than maybe a 70 or 80-year-old person that's lived their life, that has more than, we're talking about diabetes or whatever else the problems are, and then having them put on a ventilator. That's a whole different attitude. That's a whole different thing. With my father, as well as my mother-in-law, they made the decision that they were going to die. Their body began to shut down. They didn't need the drink. They didn't need the food anymore. And they passed shortly thereafter. So again, it gets to be a hard decision whenever you're having somebody that you love just had a massive heart attack. You talk to the doctors about it. Brad Harrod, who is a guy with Focus Press, he is a doctor. He has done a lot of work on knowing when somebody is dead. How can you tell if they're brain dead? He will, I don't remember if some of you may have known a guy by the name of Tate Williams, young 18-year-old boy he was going around preaching gospel meetings. He was that fired up and got in a car wreck in Texas and died shortly thereafter. But they put him on a respirator, and the parents got out there. They kept his heart beating and everything like that. They talked to the doctor. The doctor would talk about he's brain dead. So obviously he must have had a massive head injury. All right. They would talk to Brad Harrod. We want to make sure we don't want to kill him if there is a chance. So Brad would talk to them, and the doctors and Brad would talk to one another. Okay. And they finally made the decision to pull the plug. Again, that's a decision that was probably the hardest decision that those parents ever had to make. But it's a decision that, again, is not really euthanasia, because in every other circumstance, even as far back as maybe 15 years ago, if he'd have been in that car wreck, he wouldn't have made it to the hospital. But now we've gotten to the point to where we do these resuscitative situations to where you have a heartbeat and you can get them breathing. But if their brain is all mangled, are they going to have a life? What kind of life are they going to have? Is it up to us to make that decision? Is it up to us to always decide that? I am totally 100% against those who just want to commit suicide and ask some doctor to give them the medicine to do it. That's not your right to do that. As you get older, again, body systems begin to shut down and everything like that. And then it becomes a situation, do we really need to do these extra measures to keep that person alive? What kind of life, and that goes back to the quality of life argument again, which is very subjective, right? What kind of life will they have? So we'll talk about this more next week. It's a tough thing. But the arguments for abortion also are a lot of these very same arguments that we give for euthanasia and infanticide. So what I want you to do is study this next week. We're not going to spend a lot more time on that. And then we're going to go on into the ideal of capital punishment and war. All right? All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for all of your responses. Hope the class was good. And hope you're learning something. Above all, let's seek God's will. All right? Let's close with a word of prayer. Jerome, would you lead us, please, brother?
Father, we want to thank you for the opportunity to come to class and just learn about things that we know about concerning what versus our faith. Heavenly Father, help us continue to grow in the spirit and grow in knowledge of you, and help us to understand the course that we're taking. Be with all the students online, students in the class. Be with Brother Tim on the instructor, Father. Be with all the churches of Christ. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Appreciate all of you so much.